The moment between the millionaire madam and the waitress. The morning Cecelia dropped an entire tray of champagne flutes in front of 47 wealthy guests at the Grand Verano Hotel. She was certain her life had reached its lowest point. The crystal shattered. Across the marble floor in a cascade of sound that silenced the entire room, and every pair of polished, expensive eyes turned toward her. The girl in the ill-fitting uniform, the girl who smelled faintly of the overnight bus she had ridden to get here, the girl who hadn't eaten since yesterday because she needed this job more than she needed food. The humiliation burned through her chest like an open flame, and she knelt to gather the broken pieces with trembling hands while the whispers floated over her head like smoke. But one person didn't whisper. One person crossed the room, crouched down beside her without a second thought, and began picking up shards of glass with bare hands and that person was Vivienne Ashcroft, the most powerful woman in the city, worth more than most small countries, dressed in a gown that cost more than Cecelia's rent for the next 3 years. Cecelia had come to the city 6 months earlier with a single suitcase, her mother's rosary wrapped around her wrist, and a determination so fierce it felt almost like anger. She had left behind a small town where everyone already knew the ending of her story. The girl from the struggling family, the girl who would marry someone local, settle, and quietly disappear into an ordinary life. She had refused that ending. She had scraped together enough money for 1 month's rent in a shared apartment with 2 strangers, applied to every restaurant and hotel within walking distance, and landed the waitressing position at the Grand Verano on her 3rd attempt. The hotel was magnificent in a way that felt almost cruel, the kind of place where the lighting alone cost more than her salary, where the guests wore watches that could feed entire neighborhoods. She was not supposed to belong there, and everyone from the head manager down to the line cook seemed to understand that fact, even if they never said it out loud. She was good at her job, though. She had always been good at the quiet, invisible kind of work, the refilling of glasses before they emptied, the anticipating of needs before they were spoken, the way she could read a room the way other people read books. She noticed everything. She noticed which guests wanted conversation and which wanted silence. She noticed which couples were happy and which were simply performing happiness for the benefit of the room. And she noticed Vivienne Ashcroft, the very first time the woman walked into the hotel's private dining room, 3 weeks into Cecelia's employment, because Vivienne moved through the world with a kind of quiet authority that didn't need announcement. She didn't look at people the way powerful people usually did, with assessment, with calculation, with the measuring eye of someone who is always deciding whether you are useful or not. Vivienne looked at people the way you look at something you genuinely find interesting, with curiosity, with a kind of warmth that seemed almost too generous for a woman the newspapers described as ruthless, brilliant, and coldly efficient. The morning of the shattered champagne was a charity brunch that Vivienne had personally organized and funded. The room was full of her peers, the glittering, sharp-edged world of the city's elite, and Cecelia had been working the floor since 6 in the morning, running on 3 hours of sleep after her second job at the bakery had kept her until midnight. Her hands had been shaking before she even lifted the tray. She had told herself to focus, had taken 3 slow breaths the way her mother used to teach her, had carried the tray with both hands and kept her eyes forward. And then a guest had stepped backward without looking, and the collision had been so small, just a brush of shoulder against tray, but it had been enough. The sound of 40 crystal flutes meeting Italian marble is not a sound you forget. What she did not expect, what she could not have prepared herself for, was for Vivienne Ashcroft to cross 40 feet of silent, watching room and lower herself to the floor beside a crying waitress without a single moment of hesitation. The woman didn't make a speech about it. She didn't do it loudly, didn't look around to make sure people noticed her kindness. She simply came and she stayed. And she picked up broken glass with her bare hands and said, in a voice quiet enough that only Cecelia could hear, that she was not to apologize, that accidents were only accidents, and that anyone who made her feel otherwise, for this would be dealing with Vivienne personally. It was the gentleness of it that broke Cecelia open entirely. She had prepared herself for the anger of her manager, for the whispers of the guests, for the docking of her pay. But she had not prepared herself for kindness, and kindness in that moment was more devastating than any punishment could have been. In the weeks that followed, Vivienne began requesting Cecelia's section whenever she dined at the hotel. She never made it obvious. She never explained it. She simply arrived and moved naturally toward whatever table Cecelia was covering, and Cecelia learned to read the rhythm of her visits the way she read everything else in the room. They didn't speak much at first, a few words about the menu, a quiet thank you, once a comment about the rain against the tall windows, that went on just a little longer than it needed to. But something was building in the space between them, something that neither of them acknowledged out loud because to name it felt dangerous. Vivienne was from a world that had been designed to exclude Cecelia in every possible way, by wealth, by power, by the simple fact of the wide marble distance between a woman who owned buildings and a woman who cleaned them. But human hearts are not always reasonable about such distances. Cecelia began to notice the way Vivienne's composure flickered whenever their hands came close to touching during the passing of a plate. She noticed the way Vivienne's eyes didn't move on the way powerful people's eyes usually did. Toward the next thing, the next person, the next opportunity. When Vivienne looked at Cecelia, she looked as though she had arrived somewhere and intended to stay. And Cecelia, who had spent her whole life being overlooked, found that being seen by those particular eyes was the most terrifying and most beautiful experience she had ever had. The evening everything changed was a Thursday in October, when the hotel stayed open late for a private event, and the last guests filtered out. Close to midnight, Cecelia was wiping down the empty tables when she heard footsteps on the marble and looked up to find Vivienne still there, coat folded over her arm, standing in the amber light of the near-empty room with an expression on her face that Cecelia had never seen before, unguarded, almost uncertain, stripped of the elegant armor she usually wore. Vivienne said that she had been trying to leave for an hour and couldn't make herself do it, and that she didn't have a graceful way to say what she was trying to say, and that she found herself, for perhaps the first time in her adult life, without the right words. And Cecelia, who had spent 6 months learning to anticipate what people needed before they could ask for it, set down her cloth, crossed the space between them, and took Vivienne's hand in both of hers, the same hands that had shaken over a tray of champagne, the same hands that Vivienne had once steadied on a floor scattered with broken glass. And she held it and she waited, because some things don't need words. Some things just need one person to stop walking away. What grew between them after that night was not simple, and it was not easy, and it was not a fairy tale dressed in clean, uncomplicated clothes. Vivienne's world pushed back. There were raised eyebrows and whispered doubts and people who assumed they understood what a waitress could possibly want from a millionaire, who assumed the architecture of the relationship before they ever looked at the two women themselves. Cecelia faced her own fear, the fear that she would never fully belong in Vivienne's world, that she would always be the girl who arrived by bus, that love could not survive the weight of such different lives pressing against it from every side. There were nights when that fear was louder than anything else, when she stood outside Vivienne's building and almost turned around and went back to her small apartment and her ordinary life and the ending that had always been waiting for her back home. But she didn't turn back. And Vivienne, for her part, did something that no one in her life had ever really done for her. She chose someone not because they were useful, not because they made her look a certain way in a certain light, but because standing next to Cecelia was the only time Vivienne had felt entirely herself in longer than she could remember. She rearranged her world quietly and without performance to make room, not because she felt sorry for Cecelia, not out of charity or rescue or the complicated satisfaction of crossing a boundary simply because she could, but because loving someone, truly loving someone, means deciding again and again to stay even when the distance feels enormous. It means crouching down on a marble floor. It means coming back to the same table. It means standing in an empty room at midnight and finally running out of reasons to leave. If you believe in kindness, if you've ever been seen by someone at a moment when you felt completely invisible, if you've ever found something real in an unexpected place, then this story was written for you. Take a moment before you scroll away and ask yourself who in Your life has crouched down beside you when you were on the floor. And if someone came to mind, maybe today is the day to tell them what that meant. Drop a comment below and tell us, have you ever experienced a moment of unexpected kindness that changed everything for you? We read every single one. If this story touched your heart, if it moved something in you that you didn't expect to feel today, please give this video a like and share it with someone who needs to be reminded that love has no boundaries and that being truly seen by another person is the most extraordinary thing in the world. Your support keeps these stories alive, and every heart that connects to these words is why we keep telling them, because some stories don't end with shattered glass on the floor. Some stories begin there.